Hi, Zizaran here with another Delirium League starter, and this is going to be Steelmage's Lacerate Bleed Build. So we're teaming up with Steelmage once again, so he's helped provide like a path of building and written a lot of notes for the build, and then we're teaming up to make the video together. And it's a very, very strong build. It's Lacerate Bleed, levels very quickly. In the start, you use Frost Blades, and then at 28, you can switch to Blade Storm. And this is very similar to what I ended up using in the Z DPS League. So it's something that I already know is really strong and has played in the past as well. And I personally haven't tried like the Lacerate part. And then Blade Storm is really good on its own, and you can switch to Lacerate Bleed once you get into maps. So eventually you get quite a lot of single target, and the build's extremely tanky, and it's also very quickly. Gladiator is a very, very nice fast ascendancy. So yeah, it's the point of the build is Gladiator, Lacerate, Bleed, and then obviously you have some steps to get there. So we included a block version as well, and there's a tree for access to the new cluster jewels, because there's a lot of them that look really, really powerful. Obviously, that's hard to put in a build guide and telling you specifically what to do, because we don't really know everything about them yet, and that's going to come through Delirium, but definitely worth exploring. Now, keep in mind with the new patch, the fossil crafting has been changed. So the mod that's normally from corroded fossils with the weapons or bleeds from this weapon deal a lot more damage, that's moved to elder weapons. So what you are going to need is you're going to need any elder axe if you want to switch to Lacerate Bleed. So you still will use corroded fossils to give you a higher chance to craft this, but yeah, you're going to need any elder axe. And it's not super important to have like a siege axe or a really, really good base. It obviously helps, but once you switch to the Lacerate Bleed, it's more about the actual bleed and the bleed mod. So don't worry too much if you can't find an optimal base. For those of you who have never watched any of my build guides, you can watch the next part. It basically explains how bad the building works and how specifically we do our build guides. It's using like a generic template, so it's very worth watching. And yeah, you can skip if you've already seen one of my build guides. So this is Path of Building, and we use it in a special way, like way more than most streamers do. So first, there's like download instructions for Path of Building and the description. I'm using a separate branch as well, and we'll have instructions on how to do that. It's a lot more up to date, and also has some extra special things like it lets Path of Building do actual impale calculations, and you get to have pantheons. So if you're wondering why mine looks different than the default Path of Building, that is why. It's definitely worth getting POB. Generally, we use it. It's a large part of how we do the guides. And first I want to show like how to import a build. So first, to import a build, you would click here, import from paste bin. All of my guides would have a paste bin, and then you would click on the import, and then you get the guide. If you're ever just wanting to explore a streamer's build or something like that, you can just type in any streamer's profile name, and then click start, and then you have to like select through the character that they're playing on, and then you can look at everything like that. Obviously that won't be a guide, but that's how you do that. This is a video we're going to reuse for every video guide, so the POB and stuff that we'll be showing in the background won't be the one that you're watching most likely. This is more an explanation of how we do our guides, so you know what to look for and how to follow it. So something that makes our guide stand out a lot is instead of just having a finished skill tree and saying, hey, here you go, there's the skill tree, we do this step by step. And the reason for that is to make it a lot more obvious for new players where to go next, and like what are the most efficient nodes in the start. Because if all you got was this, new players would know where to go here, here, or here first. So we also include like ascendancies. If you see here, when you click on normal lab, you can see that the first one in the guide that we're using as an example would be arena challenger. When you then click on the cruel lab one, it would show blood in the eyes, and it's like this on every guide we do. And this is a good example too, because the example here is a Gladiator Bleed build, and there's a couple of different versions that we talk about in that guide. So like there's one where you focus on cluster jewels, there's one with when you switch to the bleed part, and there's another like block version for tankier. In the skills section, we usually try to make it very, very obvious, like what's for leveling and what you're actually using endgame. and like what your AoE and what your single target is. So here are some examples. You have double strike early on for single target, and then you have frost blades for clearing, and then later you switch to blade storm as your ability. And then generally gems will be linked in order of importance as well. So if you only have, for example, in this case, a 4 link, you would use Impale Rage and Close Combat. The notes section. So this is made by Mr. Madiki, and it's like an extra thing we do for new players. Like, it looks like a big wall of text, but what this does is that it shows players where each gem is and where you can buy it and where it can be found. And for example, if it's a gem that you normally don't get as that class, we'll try to specify that as well. There'll also be some extra notes, like, what to ascend, what the pantheons are, what the bandits are. So some extra info there, so you don't have to ask around a lot. In the item one, there's usually things like early game, mid game, and then I am rich and I have the money to invest in this build. So there's different gear sets as well. And pretty much all the beginner guides are really aimed at being on a super budget. I never try to flash crazy numbers like 20 million DPS, 30 million DPS. The important part about my guides is that a new player who doesn't know much about Path of Exile can achieve this, and we try to help you get that as much as possible. So as you can see, we have our normal point system, and this is for the Lacerate guide, and you can see that it shows here when to ascend and what points to take. So you see here in Cruel Lab you get the Blood in the Ice, and in Merc Lab you get Gratuitous Violence. And especially the Arena Challenger, which is your first ascendancy, makes it very fast. You instantly notice a massive speed increase on your build. And that's how you TLDR there. And then we do, as we mentioned, we have the Cluster Jewel Tree, the Bleed Switch, and the Block version there at the end game ones. So that should help out a lot as well. Now we do have a Notes tab. This is made by Mr. Madiki, and it basically shows it's a lot of extra information for the build, especially for new players. And if you've ever opened a build guide and you see that the creator talks about all these gems to buy and to use, and you don't know where to get them, well, this is for you. It shows where to buy every gem that's in the build. So you don't have to constantly go to the Wikipedia and look for that. So here in the skills, we've also added some more information just to make it easier for new players. You can see here that your double strike is your single target early on. You have frost blades for AoE, and then you can see that we've added a new one here to make sure that you understand that it's changing at level 4. At level 1, you're just using frost blades. At level 4, you get 2 support gems. You have to get Ancestral Call and Onslaught, and yeah, it changes through the process here. And then you have War Banner, and yeah, we try to make it very, very obvious like that. And there are some additional notes here, like Vulnerability Curse if you don't have a Curse Ring. And then here in the items, we have a couple of different gear sets. Now we don't normally most of the time there won't be resists on gear. So in some of the guides there might be 0 resists. There is in this one, but most of the guides will have 0 resists. Because it doesn't really matter where you get your resist. It doesn't matter if it's your left ring or your right ring or your amulet. The important thing is to get resist capped. So here we can see some early gear. It's generally just life and resists on everything, and then physical flat damage if you can get it. You're definitely gonna need a lot of dex. So what you'll most likely end up doing is crafting dexterity on a couple of pieces, like helmet, gloves. And because there's no, especially early, you're not going to use a lot of uniques, you'll have a lot of rares, so you have the opportunity to craft dex and whatever you need. So again, this is a Bleed Lacerate Gladiator, and this uses Lacerate for both your clear and single targets. You don't have to worry so much about using multiple skills or switching between them. And the main reason for Gladiator is to take advantage of challenger charges and Gratuitous Violence, which is the Bleed Explosion. Now, these two, especially combined, makes the build very, very zoom for mapping. As I said, as soon as you get the challenger charges, it feels amazing. You can see your character just start instantly jumping around with leap slam and stuff. And the build scales really well and scales quickly into endgame. And it has a ton of room for growth and investment. And Fortify is one of our main links in this build, and since we get like 215% life on the tree, it's very tanky as well. So for the leveling process and the bandits, normally you would kill Alira. This is like especially done if you're very comfortable on how to like get resistance stuff. If you're not, there's nothing wrong, especially on your first character, to help Alira with this character. You're not doing crits, so you would purely be helping Alira to get some resistances, but especially on hardcore, this can be really nice to make sure that you have enough resistances to make it through the leveling process. Later on, you can respec this by, in Act 2, selling an Onyx Amulet and 20 regrets to the vendor. Another thing, especially while leveling, if you do find that you're struggling with dexterity, normally that comes from over leveling your Val Double Strike. So by keeping your Val Double Strike a little bit low level, you won't have as a big a dex requirement. For the leveling process, you start off using Frostblades, and that's very, very nice. Obviously, it has slightly less single target, and that's what you're using Double Strike for. Val Double Strike, if you can get it especially, super worth for leveling and single target. Now, once you hit level 28, you can see that we have here Blade Storm Impale leveling. So you can see here that it switches to that. So you can see here that at 28, you switch to Blade Storm. And don't worry if you don't have a 6 link. The gems and support gems are listed in priority. So if you only have a 2 link, you would do Blade Storm and Impale, then Rage, then Close Combat, etc. Now, you could switch Fortify up even earlier if you want to be even tankier. Now, for switching to Lacerate and starting to use that, that requires both fossils and an Elder Axe. A corroded and jagged fossil is going to make it a lot more likely that you will roll the mod that attacks with this weapon does a lot more bleeding damage. And now, because of the changes to fossil crafting, you need an Elder Axe as well. Like we said earlier, don't worry too much if you have a shit base. It's still going to be good, but obviously if you can get a good base like a Siege Axe, or you can look at the other like high damage bases in the Wikipedia, then there are some really good other bases you can use too. Don't always just go for what's the most expensive, because this build doesn't really need it. So this is the weapon, the axe that you need to really switch to Lacerate. It's blades with this weapon cause a lot more damage. As you can see, like in the example gear here, it's pretty basic stuff. Just try to get something with like pretty high physical while leveling, and you're dual wielding while leveling as well, and then just life and resist on everything. As for uniques that you can find, obviously like the standard stuff, Gold Rim, Wanderlust, a Tabitha, that'd be great while leveling. You're most likely not gonna have that. Hemophilia is another item that's okay while leveling. It's not a big deal because we're already Gladiator and we have the Bleed Explosion, so it's just a little bit additional damage. One good pickup for this build is definitely the Lion's Eye Remorse, but that's not something you're going to find early game or on your first character. Resthalthus Coil as well is like really, really nice for damage. Something I find is very, very important, and a point that I really want to drive home, especially new players, is how important flasks are in survival in Path of Exile. In a lot of games, this is more something like an optional thing or a thing you don't have to do, but flasks in Path of Exile are very important, so I want to go over the flasks. So Chemist is generally the best prefix, that just reduced fast charge is used, but then you in priority, you want Bleed Immunity, which is staunching, you want then Freeze Removal, which is heat, and then after that, you want Warding, which removes curses and also makes you immune to map curses. So if you have a warding flask up and you're keeping that permanently up while mapping, you're immune to like Ele Weakness, Temp Chains, Vulnerability, as well as any curses that monsters are going to throw on you. Grounding is really important for shock immunity, and that's like the 4th priority. And for a lot of builds, we do an Adrenaline Flask, but for this one, you're leap slamming around, so you're not actually running or walking a lot. This also makes movement speed on boots more of an optional thing, and not something that's like crazy needed, right? If you find like a crazy high resist boost and you're annoyed that it doesn't have movement speed, not the biggest deal for this build. So as you can see here, for the Pantheons for this build, we have Solaris and Shikari. These are the map ones, and are only particularly exciting and particularly strong is this one when you've upgraded it. And that's because of the immune to poison when you do the Shikari or Terror of the Infinite Drifts upgrade. And if you're wondering how did I have Pantheons in my path of building, that's because we're using a separate branch, and we'll link the details of the separate branch in the description down below. And for leveling, you would use Brine King and Ralakesh. Brine King helps you not get stunned while leveling, so you don't just get like insta-killed because you're fairly low HP as well. And the Ralakesh helps a lot for doing either lab trials or for doing your actual ascendancy, because any physical damage over time is going to do less damage to you. And for anointments, Dirty Technique is pretty much best in slot for your Lacerate. And then there's a lot of good cheap nodes. Early on, something like Diamond Skin can be really good, and it's extremely cheap. And then you have like very, very cheap nodes like Weapon Artistry and stuff. But Anointing isn't super important unless you switch to Lacerate. Now, we've started doing, we've kept doing the things to solve for every build guide. So this is like sort of like spreadsheet, especially to make sure that me as a build creator remember to solve all the problems that might seem like easy and non-consequential for me because I've played the game a lot, but might be really hard for a new player to solve. So step 1, are there too many gems to equip? Especially like fitting your Val Double Strike or Val Ancestor War Chief can be a bit of a hard fit if you want both. So the solution for this is we've put both in like the same one and only using 2 support gems on them. It's very, very hard to get enough gem slots to fit both in a separate setup. Number 2, can the player have mana issues? Well, generally you end up using a mana fast for quite a while. There's a couple of nodes on the tree that you can take that help solve this. Like for example, the life and mana leech point here is a really, really good fix. On jewels, you can get physical attack damage leached as mana. You can get mana again on hit. And the best fix, especially early, is an enduring mana flask. It basically just keeps going, and you'll have it, like after spamming it a bit, you'll have it for the entire area you're in. So what quality of life and defense options are available? Well, we do get like Fortify in our main links, right? That's already a lot of survival there. And then we have a lot of leech from the build. And if you really, really want to be tanky, that's why we put in like the block option there. So you can be like a max block build. So what's the primary and secondary defenses of this build? So your primary one is going to be like the armor with the Fortify. The build does end up getting a decent amount of armor, and then that in turn makes your Val Molten Shell very strong. If you're about to fight a boss or a strong enemy, especially a Metamorph, pop your Val Molten Shell and you should have a very, very good tank, especially if you pop your Granite before the Val Molten Shell. And then again, we have block as well as an option. And the sustain in this build is mostly just life leech. So what auras do you want to use in this build? So we use Pride and Flesh and Stone and War Banner. And for special uniques or anything that makes this build work, there really isn't any. It's just the Gladiator charges are really nice and make us extremely fast. We have the Bleed for damage, and there's no like build enabling uniques that you need to make this build work. Resalta's Quell is nice, it's also obscenely rare, and most people aren't going to get one. One interaction worth mentioning is that you are using the Blood and Sand stance thing. In Sand stance, your Blade Storm is going to like move, whereas in Blood stance, it's going to stand still and do more damage. While you're clearing, stay in Sand stance, and then you're going faster and moving and stuff like that, and you switch to the Blood stance when you're doing a single target. So what's the biggest mechanical drawback of this build? Well, obviously it's an attack build. So attack builds are generally, especially if you don't know what you're doing, harder to level with at the start of a league. Something like a spell build, you're going to feel like your build is gradually upgrading as you go, whereas on a melee build, you will actually need to upgrade your weapon yourself if you want an increase in damage. And what about the financial hurdles of this build? Well, it's extremely cheap and not that many people play melee, so you're not competing that much for gear. And you can do all content. You can do Awakener on this and everything like that. So it's an extremely easy build to understand. Even though it's melee, which is obviously not as easy as spells, it's one button and you just run around right-clicking. It's a very, very easy skill. There's no complex skill or gear interactions or things that you really have to understand. The only drawback at all is that it's melee, so you have to stand next to the enemies. It's got very high power with very low investment, high single target, fast clear, and really good survival. So it's an overall very strong build. So again, a big thank you to Steelmage for partnering up with me and helping make this build guide. Check him out at twitch.tv/Steelmage, no longer 202. And check out my channel at twitch.tv/Zizaran. If there was anything you really liked about the build, you're welcome. If there was anything you didn't like about the build, go to twitch.tv/Steelmage and complain there. So again, thank you guys so much. And you can check out options to support and stuff like that below the stream. If you have any questions, drop by my channel at twitch.tv/Zizaran. Thanks for watching, and try to die less than I do. Good luck in Delirium.